Hi everybody, this is Brett Lonsdale from Lightning Tools and welcome to the webinar this afternoon on SharePoint Online Permissions Management. So what we're going to take a look at is our product DeliverPoint and how it can be used to help both SharePoint administrators or tenant administrators as well as business users to get a good handle on their SharePoint permissions, and that requires improving the permission reporting, but also allowing for some of the bulk operations around permissions management as well. So before we get started, just a quick introduction to the Lightning Tools and also to myself. So our company is a SharePoint company. We're a SharePoint ISV. We've been around since 2007, building tools and web parts for Microsoft SharePoint. And the tools that we provide, they basically enable you or help you to build solutions more quickly or overcome some of the challenges within SharePoint. And some of those challenges are of course to do with permissions, and we'll talk about what those challenges are very shortly, but also about making content more accessible, and whether that's external content that's stored inside databases and so on, to also SharePoint list content. So rather than spending users' time trying to find content and perhaps even duplicating it, we make that content available through our aggregation tools and being able to produce reports on that content and basically make it more accessible. We also have a form design tool called the Lightning Forms, and we're just about getting ready also to launch that for the modern form support as well. So you can take a modern list or modern library within inside of SharePoint and customize it whilst keeping the modern panel and the responsive design that we have today inside modern SharePoint. So that's a little bit about Lightning Tools and what we do. Myself, I was one of the founders back in 2007. I have been running the company since then, and also quite heavily involved in the SharePoint community as well, through organizing events such as SharePoint Saturday, user group meetings, contributing to books, and also speaking at events around the world as well. So that's a little bit about me. But why you're here is to learn a little bit about DeliverPoint and how we can perhaps help you to overcome some of the challenges that you have within SharePoint with regards to permissions and security. So some of the challenges that businesses face when it comes to permissions and security is the fact that business users are the people that are typically managing permissions. And if you consider the nature of Microsoft SharePoint, it's designed in a way where users themselves can create sites. They can today create Microsoft Teams as well in order to collaborate with others and perhaps manage projects, create content, and so on. And those business users have quite a lot of power. They have the ability to create these sites, and of course they are then owning that site, and they're owning the content within it, and also maintaining who can have access to that content. And this has become over the years something that you would manage those permissions internally within inside your organization, but now we have of course through the cloud and so on, we have the ability to externally share with guest users and so on as well. And the business user has the capability of doing that. One of the challenges from a business user's point of view is you don't necessarily have the right tools to properly manage that content. So being able to produce a permission report, those permission reports are quite clunky when it comes to including everybody who's got permissions. If you assign permissions through things like Active Directory groups, for example, which may have been something that is designed as a rule within inside your organization. So even though you're controlling who's got permissions, it might be that there are specific Active Directory security groups that you must use in order to assign those permissions. But as a business user, you don't obviously get to see who's inside those AD groups. So then you've got a challenge when maybe somebody leaves the organization or changes roles inside the organization. You don't necessarily know whether the content that your team are putting inside your team site have the right permissions. You can't tell if the Active Directory administrator remembered to take somebody out of an AD group when they changed roles, or remembered to remove somebody's account when they changed roles as well. So this is the sort of thing that we help with, and the way that we help is not just by giving you yet another tool that you install on your desktop, but we integrate with SharePoint so that whilst you're within the site or looking inside a list or a library, you can pull up contextual reports about who's got access to that content. And that's another thing that helps DeliverPoint to help you, is the fact that we can produce these reports with just a couple of clicks. And if you've used SharePoint for some time, you know that those permission pages are buried quite deep in the menu system. In fact, for a document or for a folder, it can take about 7 or 8 clicks in order to actually get to the permissions page. If you have a look at how many documents you've got inside your document libraries, or how many list items, there's probably thousands, at least hundreds, and nobody's really got that time to go through those clicks in order to see whether that folder or that document, or multiple folders, multiple documents, are inheriting permissions, let alone who's got permissions to that content. It'd just be way too time consuming. And again, imagine every time you've shared a folder or shared a document, and that has broken the permission inheritance on the document or the folder. How do you know when somebody's leaving the organization, changing roles, which folders, which documents they actually have direct permissions to? Nobody, I don't think, has the time to do that outside of their normal responsibilities, and this is where DeliverPoint can help. So we're helping the business user to get a better understanding of who's got permissions to their content, and being able to bulk manage permissions in cases such as when people join the company, when people leave the company, or like I say, change roles. But we also help the administrator as well. And the way that we help the administrator is by enabling them to govern permissions more easily. So you can easily check on somebody's permissions, not just within inside a single site, but also across different scopes, such as multiple site collections or even tenant scoped permission reports as well. Okay, so let's have a look at what the product looks like. So we're going to do a demonstration, and let's jump into it right now. So what we have is a modern SharePoint site. And within inside this site, we've got a couple of subsites. There's subsite 1 and subsite 2, just to play around with. And we also got some documents. Some of these documents have unique permissions. Some of them have inherited permissions, likewise with the folders. We've also got a document library here as well called private documents, which would suggest that it's perhaps got unique permissions, but we don't know. So before we take a look at DeliverPoint, let's just have a look at some of the challenges that we face with regards to the permission reporting. So what I'm going to do is click onto the cog in the right-hand corner, in the top right there, and permissions has changed quite a bit in SharePoint of late. Not just the way that we report on permissions, but also the way that permissions are granted. So we've got, for example, the new Office 365 groups and so on as well. So it makes it actually harder to use Active Directory security groups when you're trying to assign permissions, which actually makes the create permissions or grant permissions feature of DeliverPoint quite useful as well. So granting permissions, you're going to end up with a lot of Office 365 groups, since they'll be creating every single time somebody spins up a new team site. And also the reporting, like I say, has changed. So when we click onto site permissions now, we get this sort of rather simplified user interface, which on the outset looks like it's quite clear. We can see who the site owners are and who the site members are. So these are the groups that we've got, the SharePoint groups. We've got visitors, members, and owners. So we can see who those are. But what we have problems with is things like the Active Directory security groups, as I mentioned. So here is an Active Directory security group called Accounts Payable, and we can see that it has edit permissions. If we click onto that, well, as you can see, absolutely, I am clicking my mouse. I can't really prove that to you, but I am clicking it and nothing's happening. So we can't really enumerate it. What we can do, though, is come down here to the advanced permission settings. And as I go into there, we've we can see this old classic page, which we can maybe guess that this might change one day soon, but we can see here that we've got these SharePoint groups. So these are the members, the owners, and the visitors. We've also got some people that have been granted permissions directly, including the accounts payable security group, the AD security group. And if we navigate into something like the members group as well, I can see that the group is also there. So we've got the AD security group as well as the Office 365 group is nested. And I've also got another Active Directory security group called Sales. And clicking onto these, this time you will be able to see the result. We just get the account name. So we've got the name and the claims name in there, but we can't actually see who those members are. So like I say, if we had somebody change roles inside this organization or something like that, we have to put the trust into the Active Directory administrator to make sure that they have taken the person out of the group, and therefore we have to trust that their permissions have been removed. Now, within SharePoint, there is also a way to sort of check that. What you can do, if I recall how to get to it. So when we, let's just navigate back. So under the site settings, you'll notice here that the permissions page has kind of gone from the site settings now in modern. Of course, if you're using classic, then it will still be there. So we'll just go back in again once the cog has loaded. So clicking onto that cog once more and down to site permissions and to the advanced permission settings. On the ribbon here, we do have this check permissions button. So, clicking on the check permissions button, if I was to put in a user that I suspect has permissions, or maybe I know has left the organization, I can, of course, enter them in here, click on to check now, and that will tell me whether they've got permissions or not. So, so here we can see that demo user 2 is actually granted permissions through the accounts payable Active Directory security group. So we know that they still have permissions. So if that user had left, we can go and check that. The downside is you can't just pull up a list of everybody, and perhaps your team is big, and you really have no idea who's inside these AD security groups. You can't just leave this blank and determine who's got permissions. So that is really a sort of challenge for the business users. Another challenge that we have here, if we have a look at the yellow banner at the top, it says there are limited access users on this site, and users may have limited access if an item or a document to the site has been shared with them. So you can see who those limited access users are. So there are some users in here. You can see a limited access system group has limited access, and we've also got some of the items that may have broken permission inheritance. So we can click onto that, and that shows me that there's the private documents and also the document library. So we can sort of keep drilling down and viewing exceptions to see what those items are and go through and manage them. And this can be quite time consuming. Like as you can imagine, this is just a handful of documents here. If you're dealing with thousands of them, that can be quite a challenge. So let's take a look at DeliverPoint and how it helps with some of these things. So as a site owner, what we have in the top right hand corner is the ability to pull up these permission reports. We've got access to the full DeliverPoint page, which we will come to, and that is kind of like a centralized way of reporting and managing permissions. If we just want a sort of quick permission report based upon the site itself and nothing else, then we can one click on that Discover Permissions report, get straight to a full list of everybody that's got permissions. So if you compare this to what we've just seen by going through into the site settings, you just saw a handful of entries in there for groups that have got permissions, but actually there's all these users, and some of these users have duplicate permissions, have been permissioned more than once. Usually that occurs because the permission reporting in SharePoint is so obscure that you don't realize somebody's already got permissions, maybe because it is through an AD security group, and therefore you go and grant them that permission again by putting them in directly into a SharePoint group or sharing the site with them, something to that effect. And before you know it, you kind of got this permissions mess going on as we have with this site. So we can sort by username, which of course makes it easier to spot those duplications. So we can do that. We can also filter on a user. So if we were to filter on, say, demo user 2 in here, we can see that demo user 2 has edit permissions and also has contribute permissions, and that was granted in 2 different ways. So we've got the filtering, which of course we can clear. We also have the ability to filter on the permission level. So of course we can sort by the permission level, but if I was just really interested in who has design permissions or who has edit permissions to this site, something like that, we can get to that very easily. And all of these users may have been given edit permissions in different ways. Some of them are through the Office 365 group, as you can see here. This one here is through the Accounts Payable Active Directory Security group. That doesn't matter. What we've ended up with is a full list of everybody that's got edit permissions, and that's useful to know. We can also filter on how people are permissioned. So if I am particularly interested in something like that Accounts Payable security group or something, we can filter on that. And again, that Accounts Payable security group may be nested into some SharePoint groups, may also have direct permissions to the site and so on. It doesn't matter. Anybody that is granted permissions through the Accounts Payable security group is now inside this one report. So we can easily determine who's got permissions to that. Now, of course, this report might be quite large in your environment. So one of the things you can also do is export all of the reports that we produce. Rather than showing them on screen, you can actually export those out to a CSV file as well. So then, of course, you've got the ability to use Excel and its advanced filter capabilities to really get to the bottom of who's got permissions to your content. And that might be something that, as part of a governance policy, you may produce this report, say, on a monthly or a quarterly basis, and give it to your team as well, so that they can determine have the right people still got the right permissions to the content. So this is something that, like I say, it's just a one-click report. You can make it full screen and so on if you want to. So that's just a one-click report that you can get to on the site. What about all of those other items? You saw how I had to drill down to have a look at lists or libraries or items that have unique permissions. Well, what we can do here is actually do a Discover Permissions Advanced. And there's a couple of little settings here under the settings drop down that allow me to include lists or items that have broken permission inheritance. We can also include those subsites if we want to. So we've got subsite 1 and subsite 2. We can include those inside the same report. So we could pre-filter it as well. So maybe I'm looking for a particular person, or maybe we're looking for a particular Active Directory security group or permission level. So we've got those same filter capabilities that you saw in the report itself. We can still filter once a report has run, but if we know what we're looking for before we run the report, then we can also apply the filter at that stage as well. So I'm just going to leave the filter blank. We'll include unique lists, unique items, and hit generate. And what we get is this real-time report back that shows me the site permissions once again. So this is exactly the same as what we've already seen, but I can collapse those site permissions, and now I can see list permissions. So we're not seeing every single list that belongs to the site. We're just seeing those lists that have unique permissions. And that is this document library called Private Documents. So I can see here everybody who has access to that document library. And if we scroll down a little bit further, we've also got items permissions as well. So I can see all the different folders. This is actually paginated. So there's a subfolder in here. And if I keep going through, we're going to see some documents and so on, all of which have unique permissions. So the whole thing's available in one report. And again, we can just simply export that out to a CSV and play around with it in Excel if we want to. The other thing we can do in here is make changes as well. So if we do spot something that's not quite right, let's go back to the sites permissions as an example. So if we see something in here that doesn't look right, so maybe a user's got direct permissions like this one, and we really want to stay clear of direct permissions. Ideally, we want to always assign permissions through the Active Directory security groups or through SharePoint groups or Office 365 groups and so on. So we don't want this direct permission. So what I can do is select it, and from the actions menu at the top here, we can go to the account management section and then simply delete that permission. And deleting permissions is not the only thing that we might decide what we want to do. We may see by producing this report somebody that was once working as part of this team no longer is. So what we could do is transfer those permissions to someone else, or copy them if somebody has perhaps joined the team. So if somebody's going to come along and work alongside Demo User 5, instead of replace them, maybe they have an assistant or something like this, then we can just simply copy the permissions from Demo User 5 to the new user. There's also the ability to revoke as well, which sounds similar to the delete permissions. The difference here is deleting permissions is kind of something we would do if somebody left. Revoking permissions is, does Demo User 5 really need design permissions? Maybe contribute would be a better fit. So I could go through and grant the contribute permissions, but revoke the design permissions. So it's not going to take away all of the permissions. It's going to take away the permission that I want to take away. So these are things that you can do contextually whilst you're here with inside the site, but you can also do from the main DeliverPoint, page as well. Now, when we're deleting the user, we've got a few different choices. So I can choose whether I want to include any lists or items that are inside the site. So maybe I don't. Maybe I just want to affect the site itself, but leave that person as having limited access on individual items or lists. So I could remove those if I wanted to. We can also support a rollback as well. So obviously removing permissions, it's one of those things that you maybe hesitate to do because you think, am I doing the right thing? Is nobody are we going to end up with orphaned objects and so on? So what we can do is support the rollback, which means that if we do this job and then we realize, oh, that was a mistake, then we can always put it back to how it was again in one action. We can also choose whether we want to modify the SharePoint groups and the Office 365 groups and so on as well. So there's a few options around that. So clicking on to run, that will start to delete those permissions, and as you can see, that's done. And we've got that rollback option, just in case I wanted to roll it back. And this isn't the only place that I can roll it back. So if I did perform this operation and then I went and closed the dialog, I can, as you'll see in a moment, still get back to roll back that job that took place. So that's a couple of the sort of site owner, site permission reporting. When you dive into a list or a library, you can also do the similar thing from there as well. So like I said, we've got a list of different folders and different documents in here and so on. It does take a few clicks using SharePoint out of the box to ignore these DeliverPoint ones. This is us, so we have to wait kind of for this to load. And to be honest, I lose track of where we're going, but I think we click share. That doesn't seem obvious. And then we click this ellipsis in the top right hand corner that says more options. And then we go to manage access. And then we get this side panel. And then we go down to advanced before we get to that permissions page, and we can see who's really got permissions to that item. And as luck would have it, we picked an item that has unique permissions. And you saw that I could get that same information from that one-click report earlier on. But if I'm inside the document library, I'm not really too concerned about the site. I just want to know what the permissions are on some of these things. So maybe your private folder, the name suggests it might have unique permissions. Maybe there's a few of these Excel documents that we want to report on. So I can select what I want to report on. And then we've got the DeliverPoint options at the top here. So I can just simply one click with those items selected, report on all of them in one go. So we've got, like I said, those items inside a report. You've also got on the submenu here the same thing, so we can go through and discover permissions that way as well, and get to the permission report on each item. Okay, so that's some of the permission reporting. What we're going to do here is also navigate to a page where, rather than just as a site owner, maybe as a site collection administrator where you've got multiple sites that you're managing, or even as a SharePoint administrator, we want to manage permissions. So what I've done here is I've created a page, which is just a web part page. It's a very Christmassy web part page. And in here, I've added the DeliverPoint web part. And just to show you how easy that is, if I go to just remove this web part for a moment, what you can do is actually add the DeliverPoint web part to any page. So you could create as a SharePoint admin or as a site collection admin just a page somewhere that you know about, and you can go to that page to manage permissions across the whole tenant. It is security trimmed. So if you're not a SharePoint tenant administrator or a SharePoint administrator, but you happen to be a administrator across multiple site collections, then you will be able to manage those multiple site collections, but nothing else. So it is security trimmed. There's no need to be too concerned about anything else. And even though it's a web part, we can still make this full screen, which is quite useful. So I'll work in the full screen mode for a moment. And what you're going to see on the left-hand side here is a tree view that's showing right at the very top the current site collection that I'm in. So that's always at the top here. We don't have to go looking for it. So as we expand that, we can go down and see we have the top site. We've also got the two subsites, and we've got the lists and libraries. And if you focus in on the different icons within the tree view, you'll see some of them are bold and some of them are opaque. The ones that are in bold have unique permissions. The ones that are opaque are inheriting permissions. So you can see the difference quite clearly between subsite 1 and subsite 2, but also between documents and private documents as well. Excuse me. So producing the permissions report, we can select each item in here. From the reports menu, we can just simply discover permissions. Maybe we've got another question as to why does this have unique permissions? So what I can do there is actually select more than one site and discover the permissions again. So in here, we can discover the permissions across those two sites, or even compare them if I want to. So that will show me just what the differences are between those two sites. So we've got the permission reporting. That's across site collections. So we can see classic site collections down here. We've also got Office 365 groups. So you should notice that the icon changes to Office 365 groups. And as we further scroll down the tree view, you can also see Microsoft Teams as well. So we can see Microsoft Teams, private channels, and so on, and go through and manage the permissions on your Teams, as well as SharePoint. So those channels will show in there. Excuse me. So that's the permission reporting. This also becomes the scope for any operations. So from the actions menu, we also have that copy, transfer, delete, grant permissions, etc. So we can do that across multiple site collections or multiple sites, depending on what we want to do. So we can simply copy permissions from a user, such as demo user 5 to maybe demo user 6 here. So we can copy the permissions between those accounts, and notice how that's affecting several different objects that have the scope of what I selected. And as well as copy, we've got the transfer, delete, etc., as I mentioned. The other thing we can run is a unique objects report from here. So we can just simply pull up a report of all of the things that have broken permission inheritance across the site collection. So not just within inside a site, but across the site collection, which is useful. And as I mentioned, also run the discover permissions reporting as well. The jobs that we created, you can see in here, we've got the copy permissions, delete permissions, and grant permissions. And if at any stage we wanted to roll those back, this is the other place where we can go through and do that. So if you didn't support the rollback, then it will say it wasn't supported. For other jobs where rollback is supported, you can basically tick it and click onto rollback, and that will put the job back to how it was again. So it'll undo that delete permissions, if you like. You can give it the window to see when the jobs were created and so on through there. So another type of report that we also have is an account-centric report, and this report is useful to really focus in on a particular user, maybe centrally. So if we had somebody that was leaving the organization, we can do a search on their name, and from the reports menu, we can run a unique permissions report. And the unique permissions report will not just show me, it won't show me every permission that that person has got, but it's going to show me where they've been assigned permissions. So of course, there's a lot of objects where permission inheritance is taking place, but they'll have access to those documents and those sites and so on. But these are the places where they've actually been assigned them and how they've been assigned them as well. So under the account membership, I can see that demo user 2 is inside the accounts payable Active Directory security group, as well as inside this SharePoint group as well. So there's a slightly different icon depicting a AD security group versus a SharePoint group. On the right hand side, it shows me how that person is a member. So actually, the person is a member of the accounts payable Active Directory security group, and that's how they also became a member of the SharePoint group as well. So it wasn't a direct membership of the SharePoint group. I can also see any site permissions. So this user has contribute permissions to this particular site, and we can navigate to that site. List permissions as well, and then also item permissions. Now, if I was to search on a user that is also a site collection admin, so we'll run the unique permissions report once more. Here, it also includes this section for site collection administrators. So I can see that this user here is a site collection admin, which means it's even more important to run this report before you remove this account. So imagine if you just simply went and did what most people do when somebody leaves, you just delete or disable their AD account. You could end up with an orphan site collection with no site collection administrator. Whereas using this report, we can see who the site collection admins are, and then we can transfer that responsibility to somebody else should that user be leaving the organization. Yeah, once again, you can select objects in here and you can manage those through the actions menu if you see a permission that the user should not necessarily have. So that's the account-centric view. Going back to the farm-centric view, so you can select site collections and so on as scopes. You'll see other reports depending on what you select, like data count reports in here and things like that, which is also useful. So let's just deselect this subsite here. So when I select a site collection, I can run a data count report, and that will show me anybody that has perhaps been deleted in that way, where they no longer have an Active Directory account, or the Active Directory account for them is disabled. We can go through and enumerate such users, and then if you want to, you can make the entries here and remove those dead accounts. So that will take their permissions away, so you're not ending up with this permissions mess again of people that have still got permissions despite the fact that they've left the organization. So that's really a tour of DeliverPoint. Hopefully you can see that would be beneficial. There's more things that we're working on through 2020 as we move into the next decade to mainly do with sharing links. So one of the new capabilities of SharePoint is you can send out a sharing link, and that's one of the things that we will also be able to manage through DeliverPoint as well, is what items have been shared via a sharing link and who shared them and so on, which will be especially useful. So just going back to the slides for a moment, that was the demonstration. If you don't already own DeliverPoint, I know some people on the call are actually customers of DeliverPoint already. If you're just interested in what it can do for you, then have a play around with it. We offer it for free for 30 days, which in some environments is useful because you can spend those 30 days actually clearing up some permissions. So feel free to download it. There's a link here, a tiny URL link. If you can't remember the link, don't worry about it. Just go onto our website. It's fairly obvious where it is. From the products menu, follow the links to DeliverPoint, and then there'll be a download option from from there. And we'll fully support you throughout the trial as well. So if you get it installed into your environment, you want to have a bit of hand-holding as to what it can do with inside your organization, then by all means we can jump onto a call and help you with that. So at that point, I'll open up to see if there's any questions. We don't have that many people on the call because I guess it's just before Christmas and people are thinking about breaking up. Yeah, I'll open up to anybody that has got a question. If you don't, then feel free to drop me an email as well. So you can email me on brett@lightningtools.com. So brett@lightningtools.com, and I'll be happy to answer any questions through email. There is a Q&A question box in the GoToWebinar, so if you wanted to post a question in there, feel free. But otherwise, thank you very much for attending, and I hope you have a great Christmas, and perhaps see you in the new year.